Welcome back to the Media7 Summer Editions. In a TV news world composed of familiar and comforting shapes, Dylan Taite stood out. He didn't look the part, he said strange things, and he occasionally frightened the horses up in management. But he loved his music, and now Dylan's family and Independent Music New Zealand have created a new music prize in his name. Before we hear about that, Jose Barbosa looks back at the man himself.
If you happen to watch TV news at any point during the past 30 years, chances are this face would have stared out at you from the arse end of the broadcast. This was Dylan Taite, a Liverpudlian who moved to New Zealand in the early 60s. At the time, he was probably better known as Jet Rink, drummer for beat band The Merseymen.
Rather deafening, but to some people that's music and that's entertainment.
The Merseymen didn't last long, and the young Dylan worked his way from print to radio before landing a job as reporter for TVNZ, then known as the Broadcasting Corporation of New Zealand. And there he stayed, apart from a brief stint at TV3. He interviewed just about every noteworthy and not so noteworthy musician he came across.
I'm not shunning commercialism. If anything, I enjoyed the game. It is a game.
I think the secret language of music is getting devalued by the whole, over-accessibility of it. I don't really know, there's no way back. Once you've opened up the can of worms, you can't put them back in.
But I always forget chords. I can't even play a song I've known for 5 years all the way through sometimes, you know.
It's like nothing you've ever heard before.
Ask anyone and they'll tell you that Dylan's best moment was his 1979 interview with Bob Marley. It was the only interview the Zion Lion granted while he was in Auckland for a now infamous concert. The story goes that Dylan, a long-time Everton Football Club fan, was the only one in the Rugby Head media pack who could oblige when Bob and the Whalers needed an extra player for a game of soccer. Bob liked Dylan's mojo, and the resulting interview is considered to be the best Marley ever gave.
You see dabbling in politics a good idea for someone in your position?
Well, is it dabbling politics? I don't know what that is. You see, stand up and talk for my rights. I know what that is. See? And I don't care who the guy is. Because my right is my right, like my life. You know, all I have is my life. We're revolutionaries, you know?
Is that the way you'd see yourself?
Yeah, I see myself as a revolutionary.
This interview's been used in just about every Bob Marley documentary ever made, and it's made TVNZ a bit of cash over the years. Thereafter, Dylan, on occasion, used an independent film crew, just in case. In part, his job was to give the mostly conservative audience a glimpse into a different world.
With the advent of Sat Fever, as we sort of lovingly call it, and I think we've all got it, is that it's upgraded the standard of dress. If you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's brought back a whole new connotation. It's like rock and roll all over again.
He didn't just cover the music, but also how the music arrived at our ears. Here he is gauging support for moves to get more local music on air.
How, in fact, would you feel if you were forced to play 20% local music?
I'd be very uncomfortable with that because it's not a case of how we feel, it's a case of how the audience feels. My feeling is at this stage that the quality of New Zealand music wouldn't stand a 20% quota, for instance.
Oh, that's rubbish. That's absolute rubbish, and I find that totally insulting, actually.
A year later, he was reporting on the concert programme's move to the FM band.
It's a move that's given the kiss of life to Auckland's classical music lovers, many of whom nearly died waiting.
Oh, we're absolutely thrilled. We've waited a long time for FM in Auckland.
And the final score, Mozart 6, Marley 0.
A bit of crackle.
He was clever enough to recognise the innate ridiculousness of the piece to camera.
Dusty's Rusty Nuts, all those bands, household names that we all love. And what about the old bands, you ask? Well, you can never get near them. They're doing all these big multi-million-dollar deals. Thanks, Robert. Hello, is that you, Jim? No, sell. To hell with it. Just sell. 1 million shares, get rid of them. I just don't think TVNZ's going to last. Thanks, Robert.
In 1987, he filed this now classic story, perfectly capturing a type of urban mania.
Joy Nicholson senses something nasty in the air and immediately takes evasive action. The suburbs are fighting back in the Third World War, and the mutt's on the run.
Walk down any street in the suburbs, and it's not difficult to spot the anti-dog turd secret weapon. Just a container full of water on a lawn. There's one down there. There's another one across there.
His rants from a lift during TV3's Nightline angered some.
Yeah, mine's 7 tabs of ecstasy, some acid, 2 lines of speed, a cocaine highball, some uppers downers, a good mix of barbiturates, and 2 joints of your finest Sensimilia.
But spoke a measure of truth to others.
The punks have become the hippies of the 90s.
You know what I mean?
In fact, truth was what Dylan was really all about, an odd thing for an entertainment reporter to be concerned with. Have a look at this interview with George Gonzalez, an 8-foot-tall man brought in to work on the Hercules TV show. It starts with Dylan really working the giant angle.
George Gonzalez is massive.
He's encouraging you to see George only in terms of his size. Then he shows you why that's such a mistake.
I have some problem with the people, adult people, because sometimes they ask, how big you are? Oh, I know I'm a big man. You don't have to tell me.
Dylan died in 2003. By then, he'd talked to just about everyone worth talking to. A Dylan Taite story gave you a little insight into the lives of poets and artists. The sort of lives this country did not endorse because they weren't useful or productive in any sort of mainstream way. And through it all, he never cut his hair. And that is perhaps all you need to know about Dylan Taite.
Nice to see ya. Wouldn't want to beat ya.
That report by Jose Barbosa. I'm joined now by Damian Vaughn of IMNZ and one of Dylan's longtime friends and colleagues, Cameron Bennett. Damian, let's start with the Taite Music Prize itself. How did it come to be?
Well, we were discussing an idea about doing something similar to the Mercury Prize in the UK, which is an artistic award, basically. So award, you know, a prize for the critique of the album, like the artistic merit of the album.
And that's the distinguishing characteristic. It doesn't matter if it sells 1,000 copies or 100,000.
No, nothing to do with that. That's not part of the judging criteria whatsoever. It's basically the audio on the album, and that's it, essentially, which is great, and the Mercury Prize has worked very well in the UK. There's also the Australian Music Prize in Australia, and there's various other ones in most Western nations, apart from New Zealand. So we thought we'd do this. The Dylan Association came from a colleague of mine who suggested it because she thought it was a great idea from some years ago, and we thought we'd explore it. And as soon as I heard it, I thought, fantastic, it's a perfect fit. Having not known Dylan myself, but growing up watching his news stories, it's fantastic, it was perfect.
And his family, Dylan's family, are completely on board with it too,
I've spoken to John Taite, Dylan's son, who's going to be one of our judges, which is fantastic. He's based in London, unfortunately, so he won't be coming back, but he'll be representing for the family. And Jackie's also on board, and she's very happy. They're very happy that we're doing this. It's fantastic.
So what's it mean to the artist that wins this? There's a cash prize?
There is a cash prize, yeah. It's $10,000, courtesy of PPNZ, who are another industry body in the music industry. And basically the kudos of winning it, really. It's judged by a 10-person judging panel, which we've yet to decide who the judges are, but they will be from various different backgrounds, record labels, radio staff, music journalists, and John Taite himself. So.
What is it about Dylan himself in particular, do you think, that inspired the award? Because he's a unique character, isn't he?
Exactly, and from my memories of watching all the news footage, it was always about the actual music itself and what was new. I was speaking to Cameron, but just before we were doing this, and he was saying, yeah, it was always about the things that were new, and that's what we kind of want to applaud, really, like uniqueness in an actual album in its entirety. There is the Silver Scrolls, the APRA, that awards the same kind of thing, but for a single song. We're going for an entire album, a body of work, and more like an artistic piece, I suppose. I mean, it could be that it's a #1 selling record, but it might not be. So.
Cameron, when did you meet Dylan?
I met him in the mid-80s when I started at TVNZ on a program called Top Half, which was a regional show back then. And Dylan was already an anarchic and difficult to manage presence based in Hamilton, and which he remained for all program producers, which was his brilliance, of course. There's very few kind of real individuals like that left in the business.
How did he get away with it? How did he manage to consistently keep on being Dylan Taite? Because there were attempts to change the style.
There were attempts. Dylan was unfailingly polite and accommodating, and then just got on and did what he was going to do anyway. He was stubborn and determined. Your own program producer on this program, Phil Wallington, once described Dylan as being a little like mould in the shower. Once it gets in, you can't get rid of it, and which is a little unkind, I think. But Dylan was an unfailingly polite guy, but he had this great sense of his art. I mean, on the one hand, he has this award which he'd laugh at about himself, but he'd be flattered by as well. He didn't take himself seriously, but he was serious about himself and serious about his craft.
And for all that we're sort of talking about him as the rebel, he was quite focused. He got the stories, didn't he?
He did. There's this thing where he hung out in the community of journalists, but didn't like to be called a journalist. He liked to refer to himself as an audio-visual structuralist. You know. But he had a great sense for journalism. I mean, he loved the business of show business, but he wasn't starstruck by it. So he would pursue it, but with a journalist's nose.
And he clearly also wasn't above doing the end run around the record company. If they didn't give him the interview, he would go and get it sometimes, wouldn't he?
He was brilliant at this, and the thing that set him apart always was he would get his interview by going to the airport when the star arrived. So the flight comes in at 5:30, 6 in the morning. Who's out there with crew? Dylan Taite, and no one else. So he would regularly get those sound grabs, those little moments that the pack missed out on later in the day.
And one time he did that, one of those stars was Alanis Morissette. And this is a remarkable story. Just tell us the story.
Well, it's a lovely story, and typically Dylan, he was I was working on the story, he was the director of the story. And Dylan as a director is a very loose unit. You know, the direction, it's sort of, it's a hard one to pin down.
I think we saw that in that clip earlier, yes.
but just a wonderful experience. Anyway, so he did this thing, and I was a bit loath to go to the airport at that time anyway. So here's this Alanis Morissette coming to New Zealand. She was already big, a bit of a space cadet, big. We went out there. So there's just us, and we see in the corner a kid with a guitar sitting around waiting as well. Didn't think much more of it. She came in, bustled through. I think I tried to throw a line or something, and this kid was in the background, wasn't having a bar of any of us. And Dylan was saying, we should go and talk to this girl. What's this about? And it turned out she'd hitchhiked up from Nelson. Alanis was her role model. She just wanted to say hello and maybe get a signature on her guitar. Dismissed, messed about. So we stayed with the story, and we turned, and this was typical of Dylan as a journalist, saying, hang on, there's a story here that's more than just some craven profile piece. So sure enough, we took this back to Alanis Morissette later in the piece in an interview where she started by saying how much she was into her fans, how much she cared for them, all the rest of it, which was the cue for me to say, well, you cared for them. How was it that there was one fan and no one else at the airport, and you just breezed straight past this kid? Oh, really? It was a little bit of a setup, I suppose, but it was true. Anyway, we finally resulted in bringing the two together and getting the guitar signed. And who was the kid from Nelson that had this, but a very young Anika Moore? So it was a lovely story.
It's remarkable, isn't it, that he did that. And he clearly at the time didn't know who Anika Moore was. It was just this kid who'd hitchhiked up from
she was just a kid who
Nelson.
hitchhiked. She hadn't made it at that point at all. And so...
Do you think, are there equivalents of Dylan in TV news today? I almost get the sense that there are, but it's an established and accepted role now. There will be the renegade oddball. You know, every news roster has to have the quirky reporter. Whereas I don't think that was the case back. You know.
Dylan wasn't a contrivance. You know, like he was studied. I think he in some ways was quite studied, but he wasn't a contrivance. So the lovely thing you mentioned earlier was that one of the times he was off air and wanted to come back on or had the chance, the news director of TVNZ News at the time said, yeah, you can come back, get a haircut, wear a suit. Dylan's response, I'm out of here. And he went to TV3. So I don't know if there's a great deal of room. There are characters, absolutely, but he was kind of one out of the box.
Now, Damian, we didn't quite finish on the awards. It's early February that we know.
Yeah, we're going to announce.
How many nominations have,
we're going to announce 5 albums on February 2nd, who will be the finalists. And then on the 31st of March we'll have an event in Auckland where we announce the eventual winner.
Big event?
It won't be a sizable event. This is the first year after all, but yeah, hopefully in future years we'll get to the size maybe of the Mercury Prize where it's televised, etc. But you know, we will get there eventually, I think. So.
Oh, well, best of luck with it. I think it's an excellent venture, and thank you to both of you for coming in. And you can find out more about the Taite Music Prize at taitemusicprize.co.nz. The first group of finalists, as we said, is announced on February the 3rd. After the break, Dave Dobbin.